Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, Pep.
Looking
Good to
nice
be back.
today.
Thanks.
Yeah?
Yeah. So do you,
Feeling
as
good?
always.
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty good.
Good.
Yeah.
Well,
Wish Amy were here.
yeah,
She's still recovering.
she is, but I understand she's going to battle through
Yeah.
the toe injury
It's a hard thing.
and be with us here at the end of the recording. So
At the end of the recording, she's going to toe the line. And
she is. She's
man,
oh.
goodness.
Today we are continuing our series on trauma and turning the corner a little bit today. The title of today's podcast episode is Healing Trauma, the Power of Presence. We have a couple of resources we want to let you know about right away before we jump in for today's podcast. We're going to be referring to Healing Trauma by Peter Levine, 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery by Babette Rothschild.
Yeah. And you I'm glad you mentioned that, Pepper, that we're kind of we're making a bit of a turn here. We've been talking over the course of this season about we've talked about the features of trauma. We've talked about how it shows up in a number of different settings. And today and in our next episode, before we go to our wrap, we're going to talk more explicitly about, what are some important features about its healing? What do we do with the trauma that we have? And again, one thing that these episodes are not, they're not, as I think you all know, they're not intended to be a substitute for psychotherapy or for counseling or for the kind of trauma work that would be important for us to do in a confessional community or in an individual psychotherapy environment. And in light of that, this is not going to be an episode, nor will the next one be an episode in which we kind of run through the algorithm of what the actual steps are and what are the things to actually do. I think that those things are explored in really helpful, concrete, tactical ways in the 2 resources that we've mentioned. Mm-hmm. Both of these books are really easily accessible. They're very practical, and they don't take a long time to read. I think that if last I knew, Peter Levine's book also comes with a DVD that you can pop in and offers you ways of exploring some of the exercises that he recommends. And so I would invite our listeners to take advantage of those resources. What we want to do in the next 2 episodes, though, I think, is highlight some important elements, especially as we think about this. This podcast is our title is Being Known. And we want to kind of circle back and pay attention to how the process of being known itself is, in what ways does being known play a role in the healing of trauma? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things for us, that we can recommend to our patients, just in terms of those kinds of particular psychotherapeutic interventions, even medication interventions, other kind of somatic interventions for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder in particular. But also, if your experience in life or your symptoms don't extend all the way to what we would say in the business of meeting criteria for a diagnosis of PTSD, there are still things that we employ from an intervention standpoint that would be good for people to explore and access, that we will hint at here in this episode and our next one. But that we're not trying to explain and explore all those kinds of things. Instead, we really want to take a look at some general principles that are important for people, and I think for us for our listeners to hear and reflect on, consider, and allow these to be guiding principles for the process of the healing of trauma that takes place in all those different modalities that you'll read about in those two books, and that that would take place in any kind of psychotherapy environment. We begin this episode by just reminding ourselves that trauma is an experience that disintegrates systems. It disconnects systems, both at what we call the macro and the micro level. It disintegrates. When I experience trauma, I have a disconnection, a disintegration between the different functional parts of my mind, what I sense and image and feel and think, how I tell my story, how I even perceive the nature of what has actually happened to me, how I perceive the nature of what I perceive of my future and the story that I imagine that that's going to be. Disintegration is a hallmark of that. And so parts of me get separated from other parts of me, literally from a neural network standpoint, but also from my experiential standpoint. It's not easy sometimes for me to explore or look at those emotional states that I feel, because it's too hard to be with them, or it's too difficult for me to remember, to recall events. I don't want to be present with them, because the reconnecting, the coming back together, the being with process is way too overwhelming. I don't want to allow certain parts of me to be known, as it were, by other parts of me, because it is too overwhelming, and I don't have a sense that I have the agency to repair that, which is, again, back to those two pillars of what we refer to when we talk about trauma. And in addition to my having things separated apart from each other within myself, I'm also separated from others. One of the hallmark features of trauma is how often it makes it difficult for me to be connected to you, difficult for me to be connected to others. I can only really be connected to others to the degree that I'm also willing to allow different parts of me to be connected to other parts of me, some of which are too overwhelming or I hate. The part of me that says to the other part of me, why didn't you do something different to prevent the teacher from abusing you? The part of me that feels responsible, the part of me that feels ashamed even now, the part of me that I don't want people to even look at me physically, so I will use food as a way to put on the weight, and the more weight I put on, the more distance I put literally between me and you. But also it makes it less likely that you will look at me with any kind of sense of wanting to be present to me, being with me, being present to me, because if you were, that evokes all these things that are so difficult. And so there is this tearing apart, there is this separation both within me and between me and my relationships that is one of the hallmarks of trauma. And we have hinted at this, and sometimes we've even been more explicit over the course of these episodes. We've hinted at this notion that the healing of trauma, the healing of our world, begins with God's willingness to be present. Emmanuel. That God in Jesus comes naked into the world, leaves Jerusalem naked, beaten, bruised, battered, put to death, naked. He comes vulnerably. He comes to be present with us. And he comes to invite our willingness to look upon him, both as a newborn who's vulnerable enough that his parents have to flee to Egypt in fear of his life, and vulnerable as an adult in order to call forth the parts of us that we hate the most, in order to reacquaint us with parts of ourselves that heretofore we have learned to hate, that we have learned to bury, that we've learned to disconnect from, disintegrate from, because they're just way too overwhelming for us. It's not just that the situation that happened to me is overwhelming. At this point, I am overwhelming to me because I'm the one who remembers the situation. So I can't tolerate my own memory. I can't tolerate my own emotion. And these things belong to me. The events happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, but they are housed and are active currently in my brain. They're not housed 15 years ago. They're active right here and now in my mind, and I'm working really hard to keep that out of my conscious awareness. There is a well-known novel that was written back in the late 1950s. The title of the novel is "Things Fall Apart" by the Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. And I've not read the novel, but it's interesting. Like the novels that that I've never read, but that I'm like completely familiar with. Like I'm just aware. Right. It's like when I was in college.
Now, wait a minute. Listen, you have a full career that you're deep in right now, man. Don't be confessing something here on the podcast about, all the cliff notes that you used in college, because it's not going to do you any good. That's just, I'm your friend, and I'm just going to put a halt on this right now, because, you did pass the medical boards, right? That's all I'm saying.
Dude, it's worse than that.
Oh, gosh. Stop.
No, this is what I mean. I mean, here's the example. Like, I went to school where I was hanging out with people who were studying philosophy and religion and so forth, while I was driving myself mad being a chemistry major. And Soren Kierkegaard, famous Danish philosopher, Christian, right? Kierkegaard was like he was a thing. And, and he was very sexy, right? And so to drop Kierkegaard's, look, I can't even say it. Right. Soren Siren, Dirpen.
No, you sound like me.
It's like, hey, Beaker.
Right.
It would be kind of, it was cool. Like whenever you're in conversation, somebody said, well, Kierkegaard says this, Kierkegaard said that. And here's the thing. Nobody was, well, except for my one good friend, Jeff, who's like the smartest guy I know. Nobody was actually reading Kierkegaard. Nobody we just said, oh yeah, Kierkegaard. Yeah. Hey, the K bro, right? That's like the K bro, no. I wasn't reading Kierkegaard. Like I only started to read this guy about 3 years ago. And when I started to read him, realized why I wasn't reading him in college. So I'm just saying it was really cool to allow people, you were careful about it. Like you didn't actually say, yes, I read something when you didn't.
Right.
You don't tell a bald-faced lie. You just kind of let it kind of be assumed that you have read the Kierkegaard library when you're still working to try to pronounce the dude's name.
Got it.
So I haven't read Things Fall Apart, but I have read a fair bit about it. I'm aware of the story. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's a novel, a fictional novel about a character in Africa who encounters and experiences and endures and the aftermath of what it was like for their, the culture of the main character to deal with a European culture that was descending upon them. And it's a powerfully tragic story, and in which the title, Things Fall Apart, is just apt. And it is a story of one traumatic event after another that has wrapped up in it the church and culture clashes and so forth and so on. And I just want to acknowledge that this whole notion of disintegration is this primary feature of trauma and shows up not just in it's not just a function of what happens to me. It is a function of our world. And that novel is a powerful example of a story that tells the story of the world in many respects. And it tells the story of a world even in which the church plays no small role. And as we talked about in the last episode, this notion, as Newbegin rightly points out, that it is in our religion where we are more willing to abuse our power and become like God than as much as in any domain of life's existence. And so we focus on this notion of things falling apart because in that process and context, those things that do get disconnected end up being in isolation. They live in isolation from one another. And this leads to our ongoing process of being more distant from ourselves and from others. And the first step toward the healing of trauma is putting the pause on that continued trajectory of parts of us being further and further and further apart from each other, and we being further and further apart from one another, and starting to turn that trajectory around. You know, in The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis's wonderful short novel about this trip that a group of people make from hell to heaven and what they have to encounter there, he describes heaven as a place where, he describes hell as a place where people are building their homes continually further and further and further apart from one another so that they can have less and less and less to do with each other. And so the healing of trauma begins with our willingness to actually come closer, our willingness to become present with parts of ourselves, present with each other. And in order for us to do this, we have to take the first risky steps of allowing others to come closer and be present with us.
And that's the catch-22, because it's, so often it's the trauma that was, happened to us happens in relationship. And
Right.
Then you want to, cut that part of you off because you don't want to risk it again.
Right.
And this is where I think the brave work happens, right?
Right.
Where, because you have to take a chance of getting hurt again.
Right. Yeah. I have this story. I was a kid. My brothers were much older than me, and I had one of my brothers was married and had kids, and I would if I would be in their home, I would sometimes babysit for my brother and his wife, and the kids were young, and I was like, I was 12, 13, and I would babysit for them. And they'd, maybe go out to dinner or they would go do something. And but they had a dog. My brother and his wife bought this dog. The dog's name was Coco. I still remember to this day. And this dog, when they brought it home and when I was first there, and I would be there fairly often enough that the dog should be able to get familiar with me, the dog was terrified of me. And I love dogs, and I was like sad that the dog wouldn't approach me. I'd come in, the dog would run the other way, right? Like the dog was cool with my brother and my sister-in-law, but like not me. Like the dog wouldn't have anything to do with me. And I would, I'd sit in the room and I just like call to it. I would try not to I would try never to spook it. I would like the dogs would stand on the other end of the room and just look at me.
Yeah.
And it's just like a little chihuahua. That's what it was. Just a little thing. So one night I'm babysitting and I think I was just watching something on television, but I'm laying on the floor of the living room, watching something or listening to something on the radio. I forget what it was. I'm laying on the floor and I see the dog comes in through the kitchen. And I'm like, I'm just not going to move. I'm going to pretend that I'm not even here. I'm just not going to say a thing. And the dog comes in and I have no idea where the dog had met Jesus, had a conversion experience. I don't know, its own Damascus Road thing. But over the course of about, I don't know, it must have been 20 or 30 minutes, like a long time. I'm just listening to the dog kind of comes in, goes back out, comes in, comes back out. And every time it would come in, it would just get a little closer to me. And then it would start to sniff me. And I'm not moving. I'm laying and my legs are behind me, stretched out on the floor. And of course, about 20 or 30 minutes, the dog makes its way in between my legs and just nestles in, settles down, and just plants herself. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I can't believe it. And so now, like, the dog is there. Like, I start, like, I got to go to the bathroom. But like, I'm not moving. Like, this dog finally likes me. I'm not gonna, like, I don't care what it takes. If this dog stays here, like if I gotta wet my pants, like, I am not moving. Because that's the way it is with us. We and I don't know what that dog's experience was that made it so skittish with someone who is like familiar but yet not. But the parts of our brains that are very much like reptiles and very much that operate at the level of the dog. We've talked in previous episodes, we've talked about that, this polyvagal theory, this autonomic nervous system part of us that is so in charge of our fear responses. And all it takes is like one glance or one shift in the tone of voice. And we're like, no. I love this notion that Jesus, why didn't Jesus start his ministry when he was 18? Like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, why was it at 30 and not like 45? I don't know. But there was a sense in which he's easing into this. He's not just like coming in and just going to take the world by storm. God didn't take the world by storm at any point along the way after the flood. Because even then, right, there's a sense in which the flood didn't really clear up the problem. And, the Israelites, they come into the land of Canaan, and they're like 400 years of chaos before Saul takes the throne. Like, it takes time for us to become comfortable with presence. This is not unlike Jennifer, who, a patient of mine, who she grew up in a house where her father was a long-haul airline pilot, would be away for stretches of 10 days at a time, come back. A father who loved her and her siblings, but was away.
Right.
But left her with a mom who was frequently depressed, frequently, took care of her depression with alcohol. And it was pretty could be unpredictably withdrawn and angry. I mean, if Jennifer would upset her, mom would not talk to her for 2 weeks. Can you imagine?
No.
So this was not a girl who was beaten by her father. This was not a girl who was sexually abused. But this is a girl whose mind was traumatized. And in addition to this, she's got 2 younger siblings for which she's like looking around and seeing like it's not just happening to her. It's happening to everybody. And so not only is it her own state of mind that she's having to take care of, like she's got these other 2 siblings that she's feeling protective of. Jennifer grows up, become an adult. She marries this gregarious, fun guy, but who's emotionally disconnected. And by disconnected, I don't mean that he didn't feel things, but he was a guy who wasn't really paying much attention to his inner life because he also was disconnected from things. And so the way that he covered that was with his humor and with his activity, all of which was wonderful and lovely, but at the same time, he was using as a way to protect himself as well. And whenever he wouldn't be able to connect with her, these old demons of what it would be like to have mom go into her bedroom, close the door, and not like talk to her would show up. And so, not surprisingly, she found herself one day on the verge of an affair with one of her neighbors who was a stay-at-home dad. Because this is a guy who would listen. This is a guy who would pay attention. This is a guy who wasn't really all that excited about the life he was living. And this, of course, what brought her into the office was like, oh, I'm really upset because I'm having an affair. And so the identified problem is like I'm having an affair, and that, it didn't go that far, but it was close. And she became aware of this, and she had a couple of friends who were like, "What's going on with you and Donald?" Like, it's neighbors even, right? It's like we're noticing things like what's up. And so she had friends, but she's like, this is upsetting to me that I'm having an affair. The whole notion that this was resourced from the time that she was born, that she had trauma that had taken place that, for her, from her standpoint, like, it didn't look like trauma. She just lived with a mother who was depressed and angry. Yeah, okay, but like, I got my college degree and I'm now married to this fun guy and all these things. And yeah, my dad loved me. I mean, yeah, he was a pilot and he was rarely around, but he loved me. And I know that all these things, all these stories that we tell that help us stay distant from the parts of us that are so overwhelmed, that feel so broken, that are longing for someone not to shut me out of your bedroom. Instead, being depressed and, drinking your wine until you pass out. And this whole notion that her disconnection, her trauma, was primarily a function of this sense of being disconnected and all the emotional upheaval that was, related to that. And so what we call a proximity to care, her proximity to care, like there's a problem, she makes an appointment, she comes in to see me, we start to talk, and the very act of her even making the phone call is a movement toward, as it turns out, it was going to be me. It could have been one of the other counselors on our staff. But the very act of like moving toward a male, moving towards someone that she wanted to get help from, but the very nature, as you rightly said, Pepper, earlier, the very nature of the moving toward starts to evoke not only the longing, but also the sadness, and in her case, the rage of what had happened to her because of relationship. And so as she progressed, she found herself in this space where, it's kind of like the dog that gradually comes in and comes out and comes in and comes out and comes in and comes out. And at some point, we have to be willing to remain present and to be in a space where we long for people to come. And at the same time, I can't control the pace at which the dog is going to come in and eventually become my friend and find itself being able to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. And the same thing was true for Jennifer. And, one of the first things that we say about presence is that if I'm going to be present to somebody else, I first myself have to be, as we like to say, awake, alert, and attuned, not just to her, not just to Jennifer, but awake and alert and attuned to my own story. And I can't be awake and alert and attuned to Jennifer if I don't have someone else being awake, alert, and attuned to me. And so one of the things that we talk about with, we like to say in our business that you can't give people what you don't have. And we as therapists, or those of us who are listening who are anyone who's in the helping profession, you could be a pastor, you could be a teacher, you could be a coach. Or if we're in the profession of being a human being.
Yeah, you could be a friend, right? I
mean, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We sometimes say that in our confessional communities, what we really long to, what we're doing is we're training to become professional human beings. This notion that I want to be someone who is both receiving and giving. I'm going to be a conduit, is what I'm going to be, of life and love. And I can't give if I'm not receiving. I can't do it. Now I have all kinds of ways of, as Jennifer did, right? She learned how to cope. She learned how to take care of her two younger siblings. She learned how to do lots of things that enabled her to cope. But those coping strategies were also intended to contain and tamper down the pain and the trauma of her growing up years, which then began to find an outlet in her neighbor. Right? The neighbor reveals a sense of being interested.
Yeah, it's filling a legitimate need. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
The neighbor was awake, alert, and attuned to Jennifer. And when the light comes, like we run for daylight if we're in a blackened vault.
Right.
And so she was aware that one could be awake, alert, and attuned. But how do you do that in a way that's not going to itself traumatize you, because as we said earlier, like pretty clearly, like the neighbor knows that, like the neighbor's married, you're married, the neighbor knows this, the neighbor is taking advantage of this. Like we can call it whatever we want. We're in love with each other. But fundamentally, like the neighbor is taking advantage of you. Like
Right.
he's using you to meet a need that he has. That is
Right.
that whether you like you can call it we're in love, but primarily the neighbor is actually taking advantage of you. And so we had to practice helping her become awake, alert, and attuned in a way that did not feel like it was going to threaten her. And at the same time, that did not take away her agency to decide how close does she want to come to me, in this case, on her terms at any given moment. And of course, when we started to talk about these things and she starts to become like attuned and like aware of like, oh my gosh, this isn't just about an affair. This is about like my life. You know, the pulling back of the curtain on this is both revealing and liberating because we are now aware. And it is like just, it's completely, you know, it just guts her.
Yeah.
Because like I thought I could just work on the affair, but now I got to like work on like 40 years of life. You get like how it's so overwhelming. And so even then my awareness of what has happened can sometimes push me back into places where I can't imagine doing this work of healing. And so I can move the very act of coming towards someone, proximity. Once I touch that, I can find myself having reactions to this and it's like, no, I'm leaving. I can't do this. It's too overwhelming. Which we say, yeah, I get that. I really get that. And let's just remember that it's already overwhelming. It's overwhelming your system, which is why you're here, because your system can no longer keep doing what you've been doing, not for just the last like 18 months, but what you've been doing for the last 39 years. And so one of the things, though, that I point out when she says like, no, I'm not going to be okay. I'm like, look, you actually are okay. We like to talk about like, she was basically, you know, I'm worried I'm failing to thrive. I am overwhelmed. And I was like, no, you're not failing to thrive because you're here in my office. Like you are here. We are talking. And of course, this like to draw someone's attention, to become awake, alert, and attuned to where we are. Remember, trauma has us going other places. Back in my past with all my regrets and all my blame about myself and others, or into my future where all I see is catastrophe, all I see is hopelessness, all I see these other things like, and it just fills me with this felt sense of hopelessness, overwhelm. But if we can work to draw my attention to right here, we can, in our bodies, our minds, we can be present right here and be aware that like, oh, right here, right now, I'm actually okay. Like literally sitting in your office, I can feel my feet on the floor. I feel the comfort of the couch. I hear the tone of your voice. I'm aware of the view out your window. I'm here. And because you're here, you're not failing to thrive. If you're listening to this episode, I want to assure you, you are right here, right now, in this moment, because the Holy Spirit is with us and is on the loose. You are not failing to thrive. And you might think, well, Kurt, like you don't know my situation, because like, look, if you knew my life, like you see, like the whole thing is one big failure to thrive. It's like I completely comprehend how it is possible for us to tell our story that way, and that has everything to do with where we are directing our attention. Somewhere along the line, even though that dog, Coco, does not have a human prefrontal cortex, somewhere along the line, that dog, Coco, had to allow its experience of what was happening in the room with me become the thing that the dog paid the most attention to. Whatever was wrapped up in that dog's brain, in literally their lower brain, what we call the paleo mammalian brain of a dog, or the reptilian brain of a lizard, that a dog has both of those. The dog doesn't have a well-developed prefrontal cortex where it can say, well, I look at the landscape. This is safe. I'm just going to like sit down next to this dude, right? No, it's having to feel its way toward me. Somewhere along the line, that dog's attunement was paying attention to what was actually happening right here and now. And in so doing, she becomes more proximal to me. This is really hard for us to do. And so it's a long road of practicing to be more alert, not in defense, not on high alert with my amygdala and my brainstem, but be alert to what is happening in the moment right here. Where is safety to be found? Right here and now. And that sometimes takes a long road of practice. You look like you want to say something.
No, I was just thinking, one of the things that simple things that I've been doing is, as far as like being present, is, trying to practice this five senses, yeah. So sitting in the morning and it's, what is one thing I taste? What are two things I feel? What are three things I see? What are four things I hear? What are five things I touch or, feel, kind of thing. And so just going through and practicing, and it's all about just practicing to be present, to be, to be centered and present. Because like you say, you have to have it in you to be able to then take it into the next. Like for me to be present with you, I have to understand what it means to be present, period.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So it's like practicing so that I can be present in every moment and then be present with you. But I love that we've titled this The Power of Presence, because it is powerful, right? It is to be able to be in a room with you, Kurt, and be in conversation with you, and that be just where I am, and not it is it allows me to not be anxious and worried about the next things that I have to do, because that's where you can live a lot of your life. It's
right.
Just being worried about the next thing, or like you say, looking in the rearview mirror and worrying about the past that's still coming at you. But if you can be present and you can, have people in your life that you dwell and gaze and inquire with, makes a huge difference.
Right.
Yeah.
So tactically, it began with Jennifer. For her at first, we've talked so much about trauma in the body and how much we need to pay attention to that. But for her, it was even difficult for her to begin there, because the moment that she would start to like look inward, as it were, there would be a certain signals of a distress that she's even feeling, and her own body would be overwhelming to her. And we eventually got to that, but so we would start like, I just want attunement. We would practice with her, like literally paying attention to me. And by that, I mean that like quite explicitly. I'm like, I want you to, and she took a picture of me. I said, get your phone out, take a picture of me. And I tried to like look at her with a gaze of loving kindness. And I mean, I don't know what, if people would think that would be a good thing to do for me, that if they were like, gosh, could you give me somebody else to look at, please? But like, hopefully a gaze of loving kindness. And then I would say like, I just want you to observe. Like, I don't want you to like make up, like, I don't want you to try to figure out what I'm thinking. Like, what does this mean? I don't know. I just want you to observe. Like, if you were to describe what you see, like, oh yeah, some middle-aged white dude. No, I'm not. I'm looking for like, what do I look harsh? Do I look kind? Do I, what do I look like I'm present with you? Do I, and I don't want you to give meaning to it. I just want you to start to observe and get comfortable just observing what you see. Observe, like, look at my posture. Do I look comfortable? Do I look tense? I want you to pay attention to this, and I want you to take a picture of it, and I want you to practice looking at this. So she's learning, like, literally to be attuned to, like, the environment, not unlike the dog. Like, the dog's not thinking, I don't know how much experience he's had with dogs. I think I want to interview him and see whether, but I'm going to interview him from over here. No, he doesn't get that opportunity. The dog has to observe, like literally live into what the dog actually observes. And so there's attunement to me, and we went from there to her attunement to herself. Like when she would start to feel things, we would say, what are you sensing in your body? Right? What are you feeling? All those things that you just said. I love that. Like, I don't think I've heard that. Like, one of this, two of this, three of this, four of this, five of this. Like, I like our audience. Like that's a great exercise to bring us into this present moment. And that kind of a thing for her. What are you sensing, imaging, feeling, thinking? Again, observing. We've talked before about this tripod of awareness that we want to be open, we want to be observant, we want to be objective. And by objective, in that we see the entire object of who we are. And then becoming aware and attuned of other people, to others as a body of people. Eventually, she made her way into one of our confessional communities, which is where this really started to take off. And so, more specifically, when she started to become attuned to her own body, we helped her practice paying attention to what her perceptions are like. What do I perceive, right? Remember, one of the pillars of trauma, or the two pillars of trauma, depend upon how we perceive the world. So what am I perceiving? First of all, what am I perceiving? And then what is the meaning that I'm making of it? How do I perceive my nonverbal cues that I receive from others, but also that I give to others and that I give to myself? We're just observing these things. We walked her through, the polyvagal theory. We walked her through her autonomic nervous system. We walked her through the way that her body was so much in charge of and responding to her experience of trauma. We then moved from there to giving her other concrete interventions. We've talked before, perhaps we've mentioned EMDR, neurofeedback, other kinds of body work. The author Pat Ogden has done some marvelous work. We've talked about The Body Keeps the Score. There are a range of different ways in which we were giving her greater agency, because this was not, the healing of her trauma was not just a thinking project. We were beginning where God begins. And God took dust from the earth and he formed the man. We begin at the beginning. We follow God's lead and we do what he does. We begin with our bodies, and only then do we start to pay attention to the breath, to what we think, what is the meaning that I'm making out of this. And as she moved then into a confessional community, we discovered what it was like for her to have others coming to find her. What does it mean, not just for me, right? Because when she is working with me, she gets an opportunity to practice over several months of having this same predictable person come. But what do you do when you step into a room with 6 or 7 other people that you've never met before? And the only person that you know in the room is me. And as much as we, it's much as much as we talk about the beauty of how this is going to be, in my confidence in her ability to come into the room and what she's going to offer to the room, as much as what it's going to offer her, all those things, that this is now a new learning curve. And so she's going to have to pay attention not just to her embodied responses to them per se, but she's going to be in a place where she's responding to, and again, not just to 1 or 2 people, but to an entire room of people at one time. And from a quantum mechanics standpoint, that's responding to a much, much bigger body of incoming sensory experience. Well, what's so amazing about it is when that sensory experience is one of compassion and mercy. When she finds herself feeling overwhelmed in her own body, and the entire group of people are more than happy to just be present with her. There's no rush, there's no urgency, there's no sense of like, could you just please get your crap together soon enough so that we can get on to the next person who needs to talk? No, they were coming to find her, something that her mother was unable to do. Now, of course, the coming to find her, and it wasn't me with whom she'd had practice, the coming to find her evokes the whole thing of like, will you leave? Will you leave? When would you, like, is this like all the things? Right? In the most recent experience of someone coming to find her that she wanted to come to find her, her neighbor down the street, that story didn't end well. And my dad, who would come home after 10 days of being, flying overseas and then coming back, like, are you going to leave once you do find me? And when you do leave, are you going to leave me with something inside of myself? Like you're now going to like, you're going to fly back to Asia and leave me with her and your other two children that I have to take care of? And so we went from these embodied experiences to her practicing finding words, right? Because I gotta, like, if I don't have, like, I gotta find words that I can find quickly enough and effectively enough to match the things I'm sensing and imaging and feeling. And with that finding words, then over time, this, like, I mean to tell you, Van Gogh has never done anything more beautiful than to watch Jennifer's traumatic wounding become the very source of the creation of beauty, the likes of which she would never have predicted. But she's learning to do it in the context of presence. People who are willing to sit for as long as they need to sit, to lay on the floor watching television for as long as it takes for that little puppy to show up and nestle itself in and exhale. A bruised reed, our king will not break. He comes with presence to the places that are the hardest for us to allow him to come. And he doesn't come forcing his way or twisting our arms. But he does come with expectation. He does not come with impatience. He does not come with urgency, but he comes with a demand. He comes with an expectation, and the demand and the expectation is what the Holy Trinity's presence is all about. And that demand is, abide in me. Be present with me. He's not going to urgently make you come on his timetable. But if you're going to find life, we're going to find it in abiding. And he'll say, when you're ready, my abiding presence will already have been there before and after. John 15:4, abide in me and I in you. And, we talked in our last episode about trauma in the church, and like the whole notion of like abiding in the church for many of us is just like, it just gives us like a, anaphylactic allergic reaction because it's hard when we've been wounded. But this is what Jesus asks for. Abide in me and I in you, and that takes practice. And when I can't do it with Jesus, the way I need to do it is in a body of people who are willing to come for me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like, it's like me practicing my presence in the morning and then being able to be more present with you.
Yeah.
We practice our abiding with one another, and then we can abide with God in a deeper level.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, it's like we often say that, when people say, well, I can trust God, but I can't trust people. It's like, well, we actually only trust either one of them to the degree that we're just willing to trust. And, I can trust, I believe in a Jesus who comes for me because I know you come for me. And you have. And that makes Jesus believable. He's not speaking from a distance, from outer space, or from even across town. So when he says in Matthew 28:20, I am with you always, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I'm not leaving the room. You can take as long as you need to take to come in and come out and come in and come out and finally nestle yourself under, with me. I'm not leaving the room. My invitation is for you to then do the work of the body of Christ from 1 Corinthians 12, this notion that Paul writes about in this beautiful description of how we belong to each other, each serving our own different roles. And of course, shame will want to elbow its way in the room and push us out. But we know that this is all part of the long, slow work of God. And we want our listeners to be hopeful. And we know that the degree to which we are afraid to allow presence into our lives such that healing can take place is commensurate with how badly we've been wounded.
Mm.
And Jesus is not worried about this, or is he afraid of it?
Mm.
He's going to take as long as it takes because he's that committed to uncovering, turning over every stone where the residue of trauma lives. He's that serious about us.
He's going to sit still on the floor until we're brave enough to come in and out of the room, out of the room, until we can actually curl up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kurt, we like to end every episode with a little bit of a application for people for the week. What do you have for us this week?
So this week, I just want to invite you to reflect and then write down, as we often invite you to do, write down and share with someone that you trust what you are aware of in terms of how present you are to yourself, and how present those people are who are present to you. Just reflect on that. Who are the people that are present with me? And in what way are they enabling me to be present to myself? And then I would invite you to just take some time to write to those folks. You could speak to them because they might be your best friend that you talk to once a week. You could speak to them, but even writing something to them goes a little further because it's making things more permanent. Write to them, let them know that you're thankful for their presence and in what concrete ways you find them to be. And then we'd also like you to meditate on John 15, verse 4 and Matthew 28, verse 20, paying attention to what you sense and image and feel and think and how you want to respond with your body in the presence of Jesus as you engage him and as he speaks those words to you and over you. And once again, take some time to journal about that experience and share it with someone that you trust. And in this way, we want to invite us all to be practicing the presence of the one who's always coming to find us. We hope that you find that to be helpful.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you
Thank you, Pep.
That we get to abide together.
Right on.
It's
right on,
awesome.
man.
It really
right
is.
Thanks be to God.
So rich. Thanks be to God.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm going to see you next week.
Right on, man.
Yeah.
Until then.
Stick around. If you're on the YouTube here, Amy's coming to join us. So hang on. All right. See you, Kurt. Love you.
See ya. Love you too.
That was so good. I cannot believe we are almost finished with season 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found myself, I had a handful of things. I love the Coco story. I love the idea, or not the idea, that you had Jennifer take a picture of you. I found myself, or I realized, like, throughout the season, I've been looking back, like on when we talked about specific traumas, like I would look back and I would think about any trauma I had or any trauma that I knew friends experienced. But then when you said trauma disintegrates systems, I thought we all have systems.
Right.
And they're going to disintegrate.
Yeah.
Whether a small T or a big T. And we have agency. And that feels empowering to me. It doesn't,
Yeah.
and the richness, it's kind of like rupture and repair. It's like
Mhm.
my ability to respond to trauma, small t or big T, that's empowering.
Mhm.
It's not hopeless.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the thing with Coco, so I thought we are all a Coco at times and we're all a
Mhm.
Kurt at times.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's really well said.
And then like you could, then I thought, okay, the fabulous day is when you feel free to get up and don't have to pee your pants
Yeah.
and Coco doesn't run. Like
Yeah. Right. Right.
that is the
Right.
beauty, right?
Yeah. 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 Because there's a sense of like, okay, like at some point, I'm like, I'm not going to lay here all night.
Yeah.
Right. And you get up, and the thing is like, oh my gosh, will she come back?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is this just gonna be a one-time thing? And like,
Never again. Yeah.
yeah, I mean that it was so striking because ever after that night, like I was like, I was her dude.
Oh.
I mean, every time I would come, we had a thing. There would be this wrestling match. This thing where like I would, she's just little things. So like I could take my hand and she'd start to like,
Go for it.
kind of like feign, like try to like biting my hand, but not really biting my hand. Like it was like this playful thing, or like I'm like messing with her face, and she, and I'd like push her away, and she'd come right back and grab. Oh, like they would just keep. I've never really demonstrated that.
Yeah, I'd like you to do it
here.
again.
Yeah, I'm thankful for the footage.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
time stamp
yeah.
that. We'll come back to that.
Well, I got it marked.
It's our promo video.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. Season 5.
Well, and I loved that she had your brother and sister-in-law. So it wasn't like she was a stray dog who had no one. I mean, I would like her still then, but
yeah,
she had this safety thing, but she made her world much bigger. She took a risk, and
yeah.
beauty ensued. It's
yeah. It was just a really, really cool thing. And I think that's the thing. Like when we are in the throes of the aftermath of trauma, whether it's one day or 30 years, the parts of us that are in charge of the process are like our dog brains.
Yeah.
Our dog and reptilian brains, right? It's like we are, like you said, like we are Coco. And like, that's not just a metaphor. Like, right, the part of our brains that are like that are the things that are the part of the brains that are in charge.
Yeah.
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 And so it's also just one last thing. Like it's also as one who's wanting to be helpful, as the helper, one of the challenges is like with Coco, like if someone had said, look, Kurt, it's going to take 3 evenings of your laying on the floor, and the first 2 evenings she's just going to come out, and she's not going to do a thing, but on the 3rd evening, right, look to the east.
Here she comes. Yeah.
and she come. Like, no, like you don't know. Like you don't know. You can't predict this. And as a psychiatrist and as other helpers, like you're working with patients, and one of the harder things is like everybody's different. And you have a certain set of tactics that you use, skill sets that you offer, all these things that we do. We'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. And like most patients respond within the bell-shaped curve. And like, but you don't know who's in the middle of the curve and who's not.
Right.
And so it's it's a thing. So I interrupted you. So you were about to say.
Well, I was thinking of Jennifer. I loved that you said you are not failing to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about it before at some point, where if you're looking back, we're often filled with shame. If we're looking forward, then we're usually fearful. But then in this moment, we're thriving. We're typically we're okay. And I thought about, Pep, what you said about the 5 senses. I thought, oh my gosh, that's like feeling the bottom of our feet on the floor. But Pep, will you say those 5 senses The
Yeah,
5
do that
things
again.
you did?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I don't, there's different orders obviously that you can do them in, but
Yeah.
it's you just go through and it's like, you kind of calm yourself, center yourself, and you say, okay, what is one thing that I can taste? What are two things that I can see?
Mhm.
What are three things that I can hear? What are four things that I can touch? What are five things that did I say feel? I don't know what am I missing?
But whichever
Taste.
one you didn't
So,
say,
yeah.
do 5 of those.
So it's just going through them and it's, first of all, it's amazing when you're sitting
Smell.
there and you smell. Yeah,
Smell.
right.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting there, it's like you're also, you're thinking about it, like you got, okay, what are four things I can hear? And then
You hear
like all of a
them.
sudden you start hearing things like your
Yeah.
garbage truck and your saw
Right.
and
Yeah.
your, but
Right.
And
but even little
diggity.
things, little creak in the house or little, and just it's just a very easy
Mhm.
centering thing that doesn't take hardly any time at all to do.
Mhm.
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 Yeah, that's so good. And the photo of you, Kurt, like we talked a couple episodes about the stone I have from a friend to
Mhm.
take with me, and that the fact that you guys go with me to
Mm.
the difficult situations.
Mhm.
But that stone represents so much in the photo of you. Like that is a present experience that she can tap into.
Mhm.
So it's like all these things in this present moment, because that's powerful, right? To be in
Mhm.
this moment.
Yeah.
And we have agency. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I'm also aware of how I'm just repeatedly not surprised any longer, but moved, stunned, just how a now this happened in one of our confessional communities just on Tuesday night. It's in a men's group, and in this particular session, one particular guy was, kind of bringing his story into the room in a much fuller way than he has, and by that I don't just mean in terms of the facts or the details of the facts on the ground, but in terms of like the depth of the felt sense of despair that he carries with him, and his felt sense of hopelessness that there's nothing I can do, and the felt sense that I've tried this and I've tried that in my marriage and nothing seems to work, and he's kind of in that space in the privacy of his own mind where I tried everything I can do, there's nothing more than I can do, this is hopeless, I feel despair, my feeling of despair only then reinforces all the other things, and we wash, rinse, repeat. And as he spoke, one by one, different other men in the group just started to meet him. They weren't trying to get him to, be more hopeful. They weren't trying to convince him otherwise. They weren't trying to give him a set of time. Well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Not that this group of men wouldn't be tempted, because these are men of action. These are men who make things happen in the world. But over the course of several months, they have learned, they have started to become familiar with the reality that their capacity to be empathically present carries power behind it. Now, they would want to say like, well, have you thought? And I'm like, pause, tell me what they're willing to like refrain from like moving in with the chainsaws, like cutting up everything and like fixing everything.
Right.
And just being present with this guy. And this guy himself, like, is a man of action, right?
Mhm.
Even in his profession and so forth. And like, I came home that night and I said to Phyllis, I can't believe what I just witnessed. I can't believe what I just witnessed. You've got men who are chomping at the bit to like take action. And instead, what they're going to do is they're going to be present. and they're going to name what it was like for them, what they're feeling to be with him, to hear his story. They're going to name their rage. They're going to name their impatience. They're going to name their powerlessness. They're going to, and of course, some of these, they're naming this and they're like, they don't like what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't like feeling powerless. Like, which is why I want to like give you a suggestion for how you can fix this, because if you can fix this, then I won't feel powerless.
Mm-hmm.
But what they were being was authentic in their embodied experience of the moment. And in so doing, they joined him. And I mean, over the course of 20 minutes, this guy underwent a complete and utter transformation. Everything about his countenance was different. Everything about his words were different. Everything about his level of hopefulness was different. Everything about his expressed felt sense of energy was different. Everything about his willingness to consider taking concrete steps in his marriage that he already was aware of as facts, as possibilities, but that his emotional state was not allowing him to access in terms of actually doing these things. And then, of course, like, he starts to talk about this, and we go around the room again, and the guys are we're just amazed that this is how this works.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, no, like, this is the work of the Holy Spirit. This is what God does when Jesus says, like, I am with you even to the end of the age. This is what it means for him to be with.
Mm-hmm.
And your presence itself, your attunement itself, is a healing presence.
Right. No action. And it's being awake, alert, and attuned, right? There's no action in that.
Well, I would probably, I would probably say, I think there is action. I think it's action that we, though, don't categorize as such.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that we are always taking action. The question is, like, in what way are we distributing it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I can't give you a solution to a thing,
right,
the whole notion that, like, actually, no, just my loving presence is really, really a big deal in the room. That the act of attunement to you is an action.
Yeah.
Because
engagement.
Because all of us are looking for someone looking for us. We just don't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it takes time, it takes effort, it takes practice. Like, we don't know if the part of our minds that are like coco are going to take, it's going to happen in 10 minutes, or if it's going to happen in 10 days. We don't know. So we keep at it.
Coco and a Kurt.
Yeah. So.
You're quiet, Pep.
I'm just listening. I was thinking about a friend that I saw kind of embody a lot of this work, who had his own story from childhood and all that, and went after it in illegitimate ways for years and years and years and years and years. And then, discovered that the intimacy that he was really after. And he used to say, I'm an intimacy addict. I used to be a sex addict, and now I'm an intimacy addict. And it totally, being able to tell his story more truly over years and to listen to other people's stories completely changed his life. And and he went on to help so many people. Just a real embodiment of this work before I even really understood it, being able to witness it. Yeah. This was a good day.
Right on.
Indeed it was. This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be now.